So did you brainstorm on any of the questions? I hope the exercise was helpful to you. Okay. So we will start with the editorial, Hindu editorial today. That is about the tussle between the social media giants and also the concept, governance concept of union versus Delhi. So as all of you know, New Delhi is national capital territory. It's a unique area, uh, something new. It is demanding for statehood from a long time. Now, so in 2020, there are some riots, and the Delhi Assembly wanted to inquire the social media head about the same thing. Then he replied saying, it's not your territory, it comes under a national law, and under the national law, you cannot invoke us or you cannot talk to us. Okay. Now, this is a progressive judgment given by Supreme Court, which says the assemblies, the state assemblies, can also bring people to discuss about, to talk about it. At the same time, it should be careful not to enter into the union territories. Is there anything that good that is going to come out? Does Delhi actually have the power to punish? So all those things are for later discussion. But the most important thing is, if more and more people are making you accountable, whether you are a social media giant or some other company, yes, so automatically it brings in more transparency on how you work. See, think about the stats. 300 million people, 250 million people, 270 million people. This is the common number we hear in relation to the social media companies. That means that many number of people are using that particular social media app. And as the other day also I was discussing, if there is some issue, some riot or something like that, these things have the power to amplify. They are not the creators of the riot, they are the things that amplify the riots. So on the one day I was sharing cat videos, the next day I will share communal videos, so both are videos to them, but the company should be able to distinct and identify them. Till now they were able to hide behind the numbers, like we cannot do this, we don't have manpower and all those things. Now uh, states are bringing in regulations to bring all these things under control. They have to take down the request, they have to mention in the reports on how they have reacted, what they have reacted. They have to employ uh, either what we call artificial intelligence or manpower to control all these things. As long as they don't do this, they will be under some kind of scrutiny. So it's up to, for their own sake, for their own welfare, they have to bring some changes. Now, in the continuation, we also have to remember that there is a law that has been passed in this entire pandemic, where Delhi government is equal to lieutenant governor. So that's more useful for your prelims point of view. Okay, so just keep that much in mind in relation to that particular editorial. Now, taking this to a next level, if we don't want state governments or duplication of efforts, like 10 state governments calling the same Facebook head, lot of problems and all these things, parliament can be more proactive, and parliament can live telecast its subcommittee meetings and all these things like in the western countries. So that will bring in even more accountability and transparency, because if Mark Zuckerberg is sitting in front of a camera and answering to the US government, why can't the Facebook and Twitter head of India do the same? And people have the right to know, because unlike the cabinet meetings, there is nothing secret or official about it, right? It's my right to know. And such kind of transparency mechanisms will also bring in better questions from the chair, better questions from the government side. So proactive governance will be there and people will know. So that is good for the democracy. So if you are writing GS paper to answer, you can also throw in that for good measure, because handling misinformation and all these things, there should be a lot of pressure on the intermediary companies. We have to think from the company's point of view. If I have to employ more algorithms, more people, that's a cost for me. As long as I do chalta hai, okay, it's not a big deal. I don't have to hire people, so I'm making more profits. So these are the things that you need to understand in relation to this particular article. Any questions from this particular article? So there is this concept called as GOAT, greatest of all time. So in chess, I think Gary Kasparov is usually called as GOAT, the greatest of all times. But if Magnus Carlsen plays for a few more years, I'm sure he will be called as GOAT. So this is about the Novak Djokovic. So Nadal versus Federer. So who is the greatest of all time? We don't need to entertain or go into the technical details of that particular article, but you can use it in essays or ethics, right? Grit, determination, perseverance. So when all the three players were playing in one particular era, so still beating them and getting into the 20 Wimbledon trophies, or sorry, 20 Grand Slam trophies is such a huge achievement, and all three are great in their own way. If you take Federer, because of his age, he's still playing. That's a great achievement, just like Vishwanathan Anand. Okay, Nadal has his own glory. So everybody is great in their own way. So instead of talking about who is the greatest of all time debate, what did they overcome to become such great players? And even more, where are Indian players? Okay, so that can also be a line of thought for you. So we don't have to go into that. Now, I suddenly feel there is a huge lobbying going in the country, because if we see Indian Express or Hindu, there is a even Live Mint today. I somehow I don't know whether it's genuine or there is a lobby that is going on, that people are demanding to reopen the schools and it should be declared as a top priority. No, the most interesting facts about this particular article are in this particular paragraph, which says the sheer amount of dropouts. So just for empirical data, no new discussion needed. Yesterday we have discussed every angle we are supposed to discuss. He just brings in empirical data. But again, comparing India with Scandinavian countries or England or Britain, as I keep saying, we can fill all these populations in Charminar Street on a Ramzan day. So it's not ideal. At the same time, I'm not saying we should not open, but the thing is, uh, first of all, Indian problems, empirical data, number of children dropping out. Around 65% of the children believe that if they don't get the support in the right time, they will never go back to schools. And we don't know the atrocities that are happening to the girl child, especially adolescent girl child. Yes. Then nutritional security. So we have discussed all the points. Now, the only thing is, there is an interesting article in Live Mint which argues if children are wearing, masks for a long period of time, it's not good for them. So we should go to schools without masks. And then there is a lobby that school should be reopened. Parents should. 84% of the parents believe that school should be reopened. I don't want to create panic, but there is a very high probability of third wave and all these things. The same kind of lethargic attitude and all these things have been done by India, and it may work, it may not work. Bihar has already opened up schools and educational institutions. Other states will soon follow. So I mean, people are dependent on uh, you know employment for all these things. But the major consideration we have to take is declare teachers as frontline workers. Okay, and uh, yes, decline teachers as frontline workers to reduce the deaths, because as Nagasai is bringing out the data, Pari reported, right? People Archive of Rural India said more than 1650 teachers have, or 1500 teachers have died in Uttar Pradesh alone. We don't know about the rest of the country, private schools, and so on and so forth. Especially Uttar Pradesh is not linked to schools. It will be a misnomer because it is for election duty. So if you use teachers only for teaching and put them in schools, maintain social distance, give them vaccination, probably reopening schools should not be a problem. But it can be done in a staggered fashion. People whose families can afford, are areas where digital technology is available, they should do that in a hybrid fashion. But especially in rural areas where probably more open space is available, social distancing can be maintained. Okay, so I personally feel it's more of a lobby rather than a logical argument. I can be completely wrong, but you are all smarter than me, so you should know the true sense. The host of carrying variants through affected by it is left behind. Again, there is no empirical data that children are actually seriously affected. There is death, high mortality rate in the children. So multiple ways to look at this particular article. Next, even if they are infected, they are coming back to the houses. They are infecting their parents and grandparents. So that's one way to look at the things. They can be just, the hosts who are spreading, and we have hardly had 6% of the population is vaccinated. So I do agree. Maybe August will be a better time to open the schools. By July, ramp up the vaccination. Let 60 to 70% of the population at least get a single dose. We can avoid the second wave like tragedies. So yes, community schools are being done implemented in some states like Odisha already, right? Good. And the most important dimension, one of the dimensions is vaccination for children. Again, we haven't adequately vaccinated the elderly population itself. Yesterday, there was an article, right, which argues if more and more elders are vaccinated, automatically the burden of disease or transmission rates among the children will also fall down. So we need to work in that particular angle rather than say we won't open schools. Definitely, we will open. By August, we will know two things: either third wave is here, or we have successfully delayed the third wave to probably, let's say, February or something next year. Okay. Hmm. I think they're bound to open near time, but the SOP must be done. See, again, the moment you open, there is no SOP. All of us 100% know how we follow things. We literally cannot overnight educate a population which doesn't want to be educated, right? At least if they have the intention, probably we can try. But a mass population which prefers to wear masks on chin, okay, feel it's a prestige, social stigma to wear a mask. So such kind of attitude, I don't see it will work out because uh, I mean, children are children, right? They may not understand the problem. It's very difficult to control the children when we cannot educate the teachers. How can we educate the children? See, today morning I went to a hospital for my second dose. I was noticing like people hardly wear, like, I mean, very few people are like two branches, like people are totally serious, double masks and sanitizers, that batch. Then there is totally like there is no such thing as COVID on earth. If you don't like it, you ignore it. They are taking Chandrachud's opinion very seriously. There is the other batch. So if that is happening in an urban center in a hospital, at grassroots level, it's very difficult. Now, how many of you have read this article, Tracing the Decline of US Powers? Why? Okay. So first is I, you know, I if this article is written by Sanjay Baru, I would have understood that because he wants to sell a book. But I don't know what is the link between Mr. Kishore Madhubani and Sanjay Baru. So even for PSIR, I think it's totally useless in more ways than one. Uh, and the demise of US is better explained in Why Nations Fail or The World is Flat by Thomas L. Friedman. I don't know how many of you have read this book, Thomas L. Friedman, World is Flat. It inspired a book called as Imagining India by Nandan Nilekani. Anyone have read these two books? Thomas L. Friedman. Do you know Thomas L. Friedman? He used to be a New York, I think he is a New York Times columnist. He wrote this wonderful book called as World is Flat, in which he actually argues, the rise of China and all these countries are fine. We cannot blame countries to be coming up. We want more and more countries to be like USA, where liberty, fraternity, democracy, capitalism thrives, and all these things. But he says in USA, for example, Britney Spears is Britney Spears. Okay, but in China, Bill Gates is Britney Spears. Alibaba is Britney Spears. That means the youth worship these entrepreneurs. The youth call Alibaba as brother, right? So they affectionately take Kai Fu Lee or Alibaba as a family member, as a big brother. They take him as an inspiration and they work in that particular direction. Whereas American youth has, from Justin Bieber all the way till Ariana, they have so many idols and so many other priorities. So that, I mean, he generally talks about the zeitgeist of the entire youth. Okay, he's not pinpointing, and he then points out thousands other flaws in USA. So that's one way to look at the things, right? I mean, at a very micro level. This is more from IR perspective, where he talks about America has given up the real politic, and that led to a lot of problem. And I have a lot of problems with that particular article also. So we'll just skip it. If we have any other objections, I would like to listen to objections why we should not skip that article. Don't take one line and say it's important, obviously. By the way, it's the same Henry Kissinger. I don't know whether you know or not. He threatened India not to support Bangladesh liberation. We will send a USS carrier. Indira Gandhi did not budge. We made a deal with Russia during the same time, and we say, come what may, we will liberate Bangladesh. And today, 30, 40 years down the line, 50 years down the line, Bangladesh is a very rich and prosperous nation, all thanks to Indira Gandhi, her leadership, and India, mostly Indian soldiers. So same Henry Kissinger. Okay, right. Just for understanding sake, right? So again, this particular article is about communal harmony. I hope all of you know Mr. Mohan Bhagwat recently gave a speech where he says, if you lynch someone, you are not a Hindu. All Muslims are more than welcome in the country. There is no division between Hindu and Muslim DNA. All of us have common ancestors. We are from this particular land. We belong to here. Nobody will evict anyone. Now, keeping politics aside, just think about it. One of the world's largest NGOs, okay, the head of that particular NGO is coming and saying, and we are taking it as a gospel of a relation between two communities in the country. That has been debated more than any other article in the recent times, because that is the power of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the power of cooperation. When a group of people come together with a single ideology, they can create a lot of influence, and all of us know it's the backbone of the present government. But what is the most important takeaway from this particular article are two things. Universities can be hubs where the attitudinal diffusions can happen. If someone says Aurangzeb is a bigot, whereas Akbar is a good fellow, okay, or Tipu Sultan is like this, we take it as a gospel. We go with the cultural flow. Either someone told you like Tipu Sultan is a tyrant, he has done this. We forget the cultural context. We forget the temporal context. Yes, and we adapt it to the present situation. So in all such places, healthy disclosure or discussion in universities will create diversity of ideas, and that's a very very important things. And as all of you know, ABC concept of ethics, right? The more we know about the other, the more we can be sure. Yes, if you don't know the other, there is a high chance of you having a suspicion. Okay, just because you have watched a WhatsApp video about one particular person, you cannot say all people are like that. Okay, or other way is equally true. If all people are like that, it will also tell you how secure you should be. Yes, so when, as long as we don't entertain the idea of knowing the other, either you are like a fool, you don't know what precautions to take, or you are a fool for not being afraid of unnecessary things. Like, both are equally true. So that's a very simple concept. Just use it in GS paper 1. If there are solutions like what can be done for communalism, what can be done for building confidence building measures and all these things. Universities are great places where fusion happens. Group of youngsters from different religion comes together, and it's a nice thing. So coming to this particular article, I don't know how many of you realize Mr. Abhay Ahmed. Those who know the answer, please don't type it. But do you know what is his specialty? Please don't type. Do you know, yes or no? Yes or no, you can answer.
Yes.
Okay, that's an interesting suggestion. Okay, you think yes. Okay, either you know or you don't know. There is no think. Yes. So basically, he was given the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. Ethiopian Prime Minister, right? He was given Nobel Peace Prize. Always remember that context. Okay, of course, it was mentioned in the article, but normally speaking, the Nobel Prize has sung too early. Don't you think so? They celebrated the victory too early. Okay, so now the country is on the cusp of what we call as a civil war, right? Two things have to be noticed importantly here is, if you see the LTTE crisis, or the other day I was saying, no recent conflict in the world has been solved recently through peace, dialogue, negotiation, and understanding. That hasn't happened, I think, from 1990s. Not a single country had a total success through peace, dialogue, negotiation, and understanding. It's brute force or external support. These are the things that actually solved most problems. Now, why this is important is the context of ethics in international relations. Oh, one of the points in this particular article is that war crimes, rape, hunger as a threat, all these things are being used. If you go back to Hutus and Tutsis, Rwanda, LTTE, or the present case, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan, you look at any place, almost all the places, the same story is repeated, right? It's not something new. Unfortunately, it's always the majority versus minority, the tyranny in this place, in this case, the Tigerian militants, okay, that particular area, okay, that is happening, and who is going to hold them accountable? That's the most important thing we need to remember. So it's the responsibility of the international community to immediately step in and reduce the impacts, because if you remember, Bill Clinton or Germany has uh, said sorry, apologized to the uh, who? Germany apologized to whom? Kenya? Congo, yes. Okay, in the same way, Bill Clinton has apologized to the Rwandans because he had the power to reduce the impact, but we didn't. Even the same is happening right now. If the world as collectively is not coming together, then there is no point in having UNSC and other institutional bodies and we talking about ethics, human rights, and all these things. Once, say, 1,000 people have died or 10,000 people have died, then everybody will come in and say, please don't fight. What about the justice to those 10,000 people? So that is why we need to have these proactive countries which are totally invested in the human rights and other things. Okay, you don't have to go to war like America have done, but America still have a lot of clout to influence the rulers to stop the violence. So in that sense, from map pointing point of view, Ethiopia, the Tigray region, or surrounding areas can be remembered. Ethics point of view, you can remember war crimes, rape and hunger as a weapon of war. So women is always at the receiving end, no matter where you are, right? And you can also expand and link it to the global peace. Peace and negotiation is no longer working. Gandhian principles are not working. Why? Yes, definitely. You can link it to Gandhi. You can link it to other people. See, you can link it to Mandela very nicely by saying this could have happened in South Africa also, right? There is always a fault line between the blacks and the whites. Okay, the fault lines could have been exploited, and any lesser leader would have not Mandela. I mean, future generations also would have exploited that fault line, and there could have been some kind of clashes, if not communal ethnic cleansing, right? But it is the leadership of Mandela which solved a lot of problems. That is why it's a beautiful line, right? When they needed a someone, when they needed a politician or someone, they got a leader. So true leader. So Gandhian ethics, we can discuss. I mean, in the sense, the negotiation, the power of dialogue, diplomacy, and all these things are not converting for some reason. Why? Because they are not following it in letter and spirit of Gandhi. It's the middle path that Gandhi takes that is actually successful, right? Both the oppressor and the suppressed, both of them should feel that, I'm getting something out of this deal. So that is where it used to work. But if you say only my way or highway, then there is always a problem, right? So I just linked it to in West. After modernization in the West, there are peace processes which solved amicably. See, again, I haven't seen a single case. I mean, what about? I mean, within USA there was no civil war, right? If you have already established, let's say, a discussion between France and others, or the only thing you can bring in is the West Berlin Wall, right? It's a bloodless coup, more or less, unifying Germany. But macroly, if you see, I think Colombia can be one positive example, but still there is some kind of issue going in Colombia. Yeah. When I say issues, it's like this guerrilla warfares or such things. If USA and Canada are amicably solving, I don't think that's something that I'm trying to bring here. Okay. It takes a lot of patience, right? Unlimited. That is why in the last India, I think I have quoted Mr. Abhay Ahmed himself from his own Nobel Prize speech. He talks about peace, mountains of peace, oceans of patience, so on and so forth. For all the big dialogues, the same person goes on to bombard his own people. The same Mr. Barack Obama has done, more or less. So I think Nobel Peace Prize is overrated personally. So a wonderful article from C. Raja Mohan about Taliban and Afghan test. Now, there is one line in the last where he talks about and this article actually gives you a GS answer writing idea, right? Like what you can do is, I'm very good at drawing, all of you know that. Let's say this is Iran, this is Pakistan, this is India, this is Afghanistan, China. Okay, you can take the answer writing in GS paper or something. You can write like the advantages, the negatives, the advantages and negatives, then and there only. Like you can write a rough outline and you can put a map. Like for China, what will happen? CPEC will be easy, but Uyghur Muslims will be a headache. So China is very skeptical about Taliban focusing their attention on the Xinjiang province or the Uyghur Muslim issue. Okay, the same is with Russia also. Russia is very worried about the fault line of Crimea. What if the Taliban and the Crimean fighters join hands against Russia? The same is with Tehran. Tehran is a Shia dominated country, Iran, right? No, most of the Taliban are Sunni, so that's a problematic issue. I think above all, India is actually the only country which is more safe than the most of these countries because they have direct connections. Whereas India has a buffer in the name of Pakistan, and Pakistan is under a lot of due pressure, right? So how can we mold the international situation to our advantage? For that we need patience, for that we need understanding. But again, I think I'm not qualified, but I think Raja Mohan is, don't you think he's contradicting himself by saying there is no one homogeneous Taliban, and he's also saying that we should have some discussion with Talibans. So probably the word is groups. I mean, he's saying indirectly, talk to Taliban groups, discuss with multiple groups, not as a legitimate idea, but just for staying in touch. So that S is saving the paragraph in my understanding. Yes. So by talking to all these players, we can mold it to our advantage. China needs Afghanistan to be stable. We can use that to our advantage. Pakistan cannot do any adventures because China won't be happy. Russia cannot do any advantages because it has its own fault lines. And we can use the Shanghai Cooperation Organization very nicely to bring a lot of moral pressure on Russia also. Yes. So I assume all of you have read this particular article. If you haven't, read this article not to learn something new, but how to articulate what you already know, right? See, he doesn't talk anything new which we haven't discussed in the class, but the way of articulation is very, very difficult. He nicely brings out why advantages, or what are the advantages China have, what are the disadvantages China have, why Pakistan can do adventures, why Pakistan cannot do adventures. And a very critical line he discusses is Pakistan don't have the state capacity or financial capacity to control the entire Afghanistan, the entire Taliban clout. But with the Chinese backing, maybe Pakistan will solve that problem this time. So that's a very dangerous and both safe idea. Why is dangerous idea? Pakistan will have more say in Taliban. Why it's a safe idea? If everybody knows that Chinese are directly involved in controlling the Taliban, okay, if something bad happens, if Taliban is doing something wrong, automatically the existing bad name of China will further increase. China will become number one enemy, and that is always dangerous for China. Okay, so it's a very interesting article if you analyze it nicely. Any questions if you have read it, or else I will briefly discuss the outline. Can we increase the scope of national interest to global interest where we may have consensus? I don't think, see exactly the same point, Aditya. Nobody is bothered about what is happening in Yemen. Nobody is bothered about what is happening in Syria, or right now Ethiopia, or tomorrow what is about, sorry, the Boko Haram and all these issues, right? I think everybody is worried that it might come and bite them. If Afghanistan is like Australia in some remote place, I'm 100% sure nobody would have blinked twice, and we wouldn't have discussed it this much. Let them die, okay? Because we have given up on Afghanistan more or less. Okay, so there is no less scope for international consensus in my understanding. And on what basis we can bring international consensus? Because there has to be some player. This player is going to get benefit. Without consensus also, I can still get my things done, right? Like for example, if China wants a peaceful CPEC, probably it will keep funding the Taliban and they will let it be. It's like a hostage. There is no single point agenda. Everybody have their own advantage. India wants a peaceful Kashmir. No, see, everybody is unique. That is why we have a consensus. We have consensus on one thing, that is, we don't want Afghanistan to become the next terrorist hub. India don't want it. Russia don't want it. China don't want it. So we are common on one point, that we don't need Afghanistan to be a terror hub. So because we all have our own fears, collective fear is helping us. Probably it will help us in the future. So again, outrightly calling Taliban groups. What China means here is, we are not directly controlling Taliban, right? We are transferring the power in a peaceful fashion. So again, what if there are elections tomorrow? Let's say China has funded the elections in Afghanistan, dummy elections, just for the namesake. $4 or $5 billion have been spent. Everybody came, voted, and Taliban won with bumper majority. Then you cannot call Taliban as terrorist group, right? Because one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So they will say, we are legitimate government of the Afghanistan. Or even worse, the scenario I fear most is 85% Taliban is dominated or represented by the 15% Afghanistan government. For namesake, Hamid Karzai and the Taliban are friends now, hypothetically. Okay, where there is a legitimate Afghan government, but everything is administered by Taliban. Everybody will literally close their eyes, and Taliban can survive for next 50 years through that formula. Right? So there are multiple things which we don't know. It's like syllogisms, right? I cannot talk about what I don't know. But as of now, China is putting its own national interest above rat or anything else. As long as Taliban will promise, we will be terrorists, we will do activities, but we won't come towards you, China will happily close its eyes, and we cannot blame China. Why? The national interest is always takes place over ethical interests. But when the hydra-headed monster of Taliban will come and bite the Chinese, that day they will realize that they have done a blunder, right? So good article. I felt like most of you haven't even seen this particular article, but I will encourage you to read this particular article just for what we call as uh, consolidation. Okay. There is one more article. This is about the new Uttar Pradesh policy on population. So what does that particular policy do? That policy discourages you to get promotions if you have more than 2 kids. It bars you from contesting elections. Yes. It also bars you from getting government subsidies. If you have more than 2 children in a house, okay, probably won't get the LPG subsidy or ration subsidy or some things like this. Actually, I think it's those families who actually need the subsidies more, because empirical data shows that if you are poor, if you are illiterate, and if you are from marginalized sections of the society, your fertility rate is actually high. It's the poor people who have more children rather than the rich people. One, automatically, if you empower, educate, and give livelihood to the people, they don't go for more and more children. They will automatically bring the total fertility rate down. They will do proper family planning with awareness. Yes. So punitive or pressure tactics will never work. The best solution is empowerment, education, and awareness generation. You can use ASHA workers, you can use the social media, the celebrities, and all these people to create more and more awareness. Now, why this is not a long-term strategy? Because though it's a popular myth, I think even our own Hari Krishna, if you remember in the one of the classes, he proudly proclaimed geometric progression, arithmetic progression, and that myth was debunked with one particular empirical data, right? So you cannot make it a communal agenda. So we need not worry about it, because government's own data is showing that total fertility rates level have come down very drastically. Yes, in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, it's still very high. But again, if you see, for administrative governance sake, we cannot rule a state like Uttar Pradesh. Just imagine Uttar Pradesh in 2050, 28 crore population under one state. Just imagine the administrative nightmare, 28 crores. Okay, it's equivalent to USA, and we call it one Indian state. That can never work, right? We have to have smaller state for administrative eases. Okay, then we can generate more awareness, we can target them and bring the population under control. Also, socio-cultural reasons like religion and other factors play a role, where people don't use contraceptives or they don't go for birth control. Those things also have to be controlled. But no matter which state or which religion, if you empower them, if you educate them, give them livelihood, it is proved throughout the world, TFR will slowly come down. So what is the success ratio of this particular political policy? Long run, I don't see anything, but it's a good thing, because more people will come to know what is the actual scenario of Indian population ratio. Okay. 2022 elections will be the simplest answer. So if you look at the Assam case, Assam chief minister is talking that, we want to empower them. We want to empower the minority sections by bringing them awareness. If you have only one or two kids, automatically your standard of living will increase, right? So that's positive tone that he's adding to the what the population control policy. So it's a common misconception, right? It's a common misconception in India that Muslims have more children than Hindus. But if you actually take out empirical data, it's opposite is true. So more Hindu men have two wives, polygamy, right? More Hindu women have more children, two children. So all these myths are leading to the creation of population policies. Again, luckily they are not coercive, right? They are not coercing anyone to compulsorily get a operation or something like what Mr. Sanjay Gandhi has done in the emergency periods.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
What role does the Finance Commission's devolution criteria play in this? I mean, there is this demographic dividend criteria, right? So is the state finances also a motivation for this?
Again, opposite will be true, right? I mean, if they are backwards, they will get more funds. I think they want to bring that. See, there are two ways to look at this particular article. We are talking it overall Indian sense, and we are talking about Uttar Pradesh in particular sense. Let's say Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are very backward. Still, people have all kind of superstitions. I mean, they are living in a whole different paradigm. Okay, maybe for them, this external push coercive, like openly telling, okay, explicitly you have to control or something, will work. That is a perception of the government. I am not saying it is actually true, but in government's mind, they have tried everything. Okay, now the explicit version, like please do this, is what is working. I am sure they haven't linked it to the finance commission devolutions, because it's not that easy. Even if you start these policies right now in 2021, it will take a decade for the results to reflect, right? I mean, assuming it will work. So in my personal opinion, I don't think there is an immediate need for this. I mean, the link is to finance commission. Anyhow, we have to keep supporting them till they reach the overall fertility rate like India. I think it's around 3 in Uttar Pradesh, or 3.3 in Uttar Pradesh and 3.4 in Bihar. Slowly they will come to Indian level and things might work. Okay. So this is one more article just like that communal harmony article. This also I linked it to the ABC models. What he talks is about there is an ethics concept called as value systems, values that we learn from family, schools, and institutions, right? Like society perspective. So he specifically says when it comes to race and religion, the social attitude we develop is much different from any other attitude. Okay, it's deeply ingrained and it's more or less like a community wisdom. And such kind of socializations happen even way before you enter the school or way after you leave the school also. So when it's a common public knowledge, like when the entire society thinks in the same paradigm or in the same thought processes, okay, the attitudes get so deeply ingrained and we don't see that reflecting outrightly. I cannot call you as a bigot or Islamophobic or something like that unless there is an explicit evidence, but subconsciously you might have the same prejudices and same feelings. You are just not explicitly bringing them out. So student is very susceptible to the attitudinal changes because of the socialization. And he argues schools are a wonderful place to change such kind of attitudes, but the most important thing is the person who is teaching. But the person who is teaching should have the freedom to function and intellectual acumen to understand that some things have to be snubbed out very harshly and outrightly. Yes, there are no ifs and buts, right? If you are responsible as a teacher to snub out the entrenched prejudices of race, religion, and all these things, you have to say no, or you have to educate them in the right tone. Again, I'm not saying dandaniti and all these things. I'm saying that that kind of attitude freedom should be given to the teacher. So when both these things work, we will root out a lot of problems uh, from the society at a very efficient level, because once you are out of the school, most of your ideas are deeply ingrained. Unless you start preparing for UPSC, 99% of the times we don't challenge our notions, our ideas, and we live the same life. Am I wrong? I mean, you can argue, sir, I have seen a movie, I have read a book, I have changed myself. But normally speaking, most of the times the ideas we ingrain in school, or the mindset we ingrain in school carries forward till long time. No time to reflect on our ideals after school, rat race. Okay. As there are issues from taking off the news to reporting and filing them. I didn't get you, Aditya. Misinformation, malinformation, disinformation. Okay. No, see, above and beyond all these things, a particular kind of mindset, a particular kind of attitude, a trait, a prejudice, all these things have been ingrained in you. No. You're misunderstanding the question. I'm not saying what you have learned in the school. I'm telling you what you learn in the life during the school age. Right? We are nowhere talking about Ashoka, Akbar, Aurangzeb, all these things. What I'm trying to tell you is from the age of 4 to 16. I don't know what time, like what age you come out of the school. 14, 16, right? Yeah. So let's say 16 years. So from as a kid to 16 years, you come out of the school, right? During that time, whatever you have learned as a socialized person, not only from books, honestly, at least I didn't learn much from the school books, right? What we learn about friendships, trust, lot of things in the life. we learn outside the classrooms or beyond the books. So those things, basic skeleton of values, thought process are developed during the course of the school. Yes, exactly. So for me personally, for example, when I was, as long as I was in school, I never knew what is caste or religion. I mean, in the sense I knew, no, I know them, but I never had an issue with those two things, or I never had to see anyone in a different lens. But when I came to UPSC, you trust me, that is, a cultural shock, that kind of thing to me. The same Telugu people, when they are in Delhi, I have seen in literally each and every state person in Delhi, right? So it's kind of a strange feeling for me. Then I came to know what are the prejudices. So in a way, I was lucky. When I was in school, I never discussed such idiotic things like who is what caste, religion, we should not talk to him, blah blah, and all those things. So probably exactly my point, right? When I say school age, don't we talk to our parents and society? Obviously, that is my question, right? From 0 to 16, the socializing part, socialization, I hope you understand the word. Yes, so socialization, that part. Again, I'm saying, right, I probably am lucky, or even all my friends are from the same, we never discussed such things. Everybody had a nickname, and we used to call him as that nickname. That's all. He's a nickname to us. He's not a religion. He's not this. He's not that. One guy is from Kerala. One guy is from a different religion. So all of us were like one thing. What is your nickname? That is what you are to me. So that kind of socialization probably, forms my base for liberalism. Yes, you might be at the receiving end of the system, then you are a whole differently socialized person, right? So I hope you get the idea in what I'm trying to tell you. The values can be molded at the later stage, from filling to deprived of. Yes, exactly. Okay, but very few people actually have that. See, some of your classmates are there. I don't want to name any names, but generally it's like this. When I say you are doing good, like they feel like Kalyan sir is very good. When I say you are totally useless, you are a piece of garbage. Again, they say Kalyan sir is very bad, he's arrogant. But no, when I say you are good, I don't say it with any prejudice, or when I don't say it with any favoritism. I feel in that moment you have done something good, I will tell you. When I feel like you are a piece of garbage, I will tell you the same thing. When I say both the things, okay, your perception about me changes. Okay, but my perception about you doesn't change. I don't have any emotional attachment, right? When I say, you have all the potential in the world, I say it and I mean it. When I say you're useless, I also mean that. Why? Because in that moment you stopped performing. It's not an emotional exam, it's not a school exam, right? I have to pacify you, I have to satisfy your ego. None of these things will work. Either you are in the race or you are not in the race. Okay, so in that sense, the student, he takes it to ego, right? Like, okay, but what the simple point he misses is, why can't I stop and think? The same person few days ago said, I have all the potential in the world. Few months down the line, why is he saying? We don't stop and think. What we take is, okay, fine, right? So that simple lesson, I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is that simple understanding that when you stop and think, it will give you a lot of perspective. Okay, is missing out. Our immediate is, probably from childhood, your mom has groomed you like this. You are brilliant, you are the best, you are the best. All your school teachers have also boosted that ego. You are a gold medalist, you can do anything, you are an IAS. Yeah, you are born IAS. When you come hearing all these things, and when suddenly some nobody called Kalyan circumstances, you are totally a useless piece of garbage. It's our ego, right? Why? I have cracked so many exams, why can't I crack? So again, that attitude is not going to help anyone. What I'm trying to tell you is, if this can happen to a UPSC aspirant who considers himself as very smart, It's very common for a school student or a family who has lived 40 years of a life in a bubble. Okay, this is how we are going to live. And if somebody suddenly comes and says, please don't, I think it's very, very difficult for them to change. Yes. So that is why cultural prejudices and systemic injustices still continue. It's the only thing is light through education. Education again here is not certificates. Education is awareness. Okay. So in this particular moment, I will like to recommend you a book called as Think Again by Adam Grant. If you have time again. Think Again by Adam Grant is a wonderful book. If you have time, you can listen to audiobook or you can read the PDF or paperback. It's highly suggested. It will question your own thought processes. And if most of the society actually works on that particular book, we can see a lot of changes. Okay. So I hope the core message is understood by all of us, right? We have a inherent system which is ingrained not only by books, by entire life cycles from 0 to 16. Even your rickshaw wala or auto driver or your, how helper in the domestic helper in the home, they also shape your prejudices or they also bust your prejudices, right? Let's say you have a you have a domestic help, her son is your friend, and your parents never had any issue with you doing friendship with a mate's son, and they treated both of you like the same. Probably you have very beautiful parents who are reducing prejudices in their own effort, in their own level. Okay, but if you have a grandfather, grandmother, or someone says, we are this, we are that, you should not touch them, blah blah blah. And if you have ingrained that some of those qualities, it's not your fault. Okay, so you can forgive your grandparents and you can move on. You can be a better person always, right? So two different things. So that should conclude the simple discussion. Yes. Anybody faced similar scenarios? So yes, you can use them in your essays and ethics answer writing. See, that is what happens, right? When you read newspapers, you get to bring dimensions to your answer writing and your knowledge. The most important thing is not having points in your knowledge. Sorry, not having points in your brain. The best part is connecting those points. Okay. Yes. Any questions? So I hope you are developing perspectives on a continuous basis. And the most important thing is using these perspectives in the answer writing. So I would like to see one day how much your answer writing is influenced by these classes and how will you remember all these things. Okay, then if you don't have any questions, I will end the session here. We'll meet tomorrow, same time. By the way, yes, which asked women to be let free as she is pregnant. I have missed that article totally, Aditya. I haven't seen it. Such interesting articles. I have to go a bit more into the background. I didn't see that. I will definitely get back to you tomorrow. Because we need to understand the full picture, right? Okay. Yeah. No, they are not implementing one child policy. They are saying two children. So we are not influenced by China. We are trying to be progressive. See, again, I'm saying, right, they might be in a bubble. The government in those areas might be in a bubble. Our people, like Indians, typically are danda. Like, we need a dictator. We need a authoritarian. Only then people will listen. This is a common mindset that Indians have, right? India kabhi nahi sudharega. India will never change unless we have a dictator. Some kind of mindset has been fixed in the people's mind. So probably they're trying to bring this coercive tactics in that sense. Yeah. Yes, definitely. Jan Aushadhi scheme, Gargar Aushadhi scheme, home deliveries can be implemented. The better model is Cuban model, right? Prevention is better than cure. Yes. Yeah. Okay then. Take care, everyone.